Hello, my name is Lynn Peterson, and I am the founder of One Recovery, the 501c3 organization dedicated to the inspiration of young people. We operate under a very simple premise that there is one recovery from all struggles, and that recovery resides in the connection of humans for cause. On March 22nd, Monday, Dr. Timothy Fong hosted for us an event to raise all of our awareness about vaping, the dangers, the facts, the fiction, the culture. So what you're going to see now is Dr. Timothy Fong's The Vape Culture, the Facts, and the Fiction.
Audience out there, my name is Dr. Timothy Fong. I'm a professor of psychiatry at UCLA. My specialty area is addiction psychiatry, so I focus on understanding and the research and providing treatment for all addictive disorders, substances, alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, gambling, video game. We did this presentation about a year ago in 2020. We did that live in Newport, and we had an amazing night of energy, and we connected. Now, fast forward 1 year later, we're bringing this to you again. Lots of new information, lots of critical information. But this time it's different. We're going to record it. We're going to have a digital experience with this, and we're going to connect, we're going to inspire, and we're going to develop solutions. What I have here tonight is to talk about really three things. Number one, how and why vaping is so popular. We're going to talk about things that you don't hear about in the news, things you won't read about in textbooks. We're going to talk about the latest information about how vaping affects the body, the brain, and the mind. And whether you're a parent, whether you're a student, whether you're an educator, whether you're a clinician, this is going to be valuable information. But most importantly, I have a blueprint to reduce harm from vaping, because that ultimately is our goal. You won't hear me say, I want everyone to stop vaping. No, our goal is to prevent harm from vaping. So that's what we're going to cover here today. After I finish up, we're going to have the panel engage in a number of questions, and then I'm going to be back a little bit later for also to end that Q&A. Before I get started, though, I just want to highlight, I texted one of my patients this morning, and she's young, she's 22, she vapes, she stopped, and I said to her, if you were talking to parents, if you were talking to high school students, what would you want them to know about vaping? And she said it so well. I just want to read it. She said, I would tell them that the 22-year-old person will hate yourself for developing a major addiction to a substance, and they're going to have a very hard time quitting during the hardest academic time of your lives. But she said it so well. I started vaping since the junior year in high school 5 years ago. And my biggest advice is that I wish I never started. And I couldn't say it more powerful than that. And she's a wonderful young woman, and she's done so well in recovery, but she said it so clear. I just wish I never started. Of course, we can't say that for everyone, but we can say, what can we do once they start, and how do we stop them from developing into addiction? But first, let's go all the way to the beginning. We never talk about basic words. Words matter. Go back to the glossary. What is just smoke? Smoke are all the particulates, all the substances created by combustion. So it's lots of substances, solid, liquid, gas, particles. When I barbecue out here on the patio, we create a lot of smoke. There's a lot of smell, and people come running for miles saying, what is that smell coming from Fong's house? But that's different than a vapor. Go back to chemistry. A vapor is when a substance transforms phases, liquid to gas, water to aerosol. A vapor is just one substance. It's not having all the things together. So really what we're talking about when we're talking about vaping, we're really talking about the word aerosol, which is a suspension of tiny particles of liquid solid within a gas. Think Lysol spray, think Glad spray. These are aerosol. Think deodorant back from the 80s when you did that spray stuff. It has all sorts of chemicals inside. So the word vaping actually didn't become recognized by the dictionary until the year 2000. So many people on this talk tonight weren't even born. But theoretically, the actual correct scientific term isn't vaping, it's aerosolizing. Well, vaping just rolls off the tongue a little bit easier, and that's probably why it got its start that way. Here are an example of the vaping devices. Vladimir, who's on the panel, has a whole host of these devices in his home. He's going to show us some of those. And I put them up there because you can see they look like video game cartridges. They look like computer software, and they go from a wide variety. And in fact, is this a vaping device? Is this? Is this? All that or no, computer devices. And in fact, this is the actual vaping device. This, of course, is a Juul device. And to the parents and students and teachers who don't know, you'd say, oh, that's just another USB stick for their homework. This is not. It's actually a vaping device. We'll talk a little bit more about what these each do. But nowadays in 2021, in addition to the Juul, there are a lot more other newer technologies out there for vaping, of course, not just nicotine, but cannabis. So we think about, in just a span of about 10 years, how we went from very bulky technology that people would use to vape to very compact, very small and powerful. In other words, what will the next generation of vaping devices look like in the next 5 or 10 years? Smaller, more compact, more battery power, more concealable. Could they actually also have Wi-Fi? Many of them already have Wi-Fi. Could they be tied into other things like directly into our bloodstreams and things like that? Wearables on our glasses. These are things that certainly might happen. All right, so again, just defining what a vaping device as we think about it. These are battery operated devices that heat usually a liquid to make it into an aerosol. And that liquid contains substance, usually nicotine, but it can, of course, be cannabis, flavorings, menthol, orange, passion fruit, and the variety of other chemicals to seal the liquid together. Colloquially, we have all sorts of names for these vaping devices, from e-cigarettes to e-vaporizer. The scientific term we use is electronic nicotine or electronic cannabis delivery systems. E-hookah, mods, vape pens, tank system, pod mods, just the brand name Juul. It's a whole new culture, a whole new language has developed around this. And it's important for parents to learn this language, to hear from their family members about what people are using and what's the trends. How do they work? Pretty simply, if we take a look at this Juul device, these are essentially cartridges or refillable tanks of e-liquid that you put onto the battery device here. You turn the battery on, you puff on it, you create an aerosolize because the battery heats up the liquid. It's it's inhaled directly into the lungs and exhaled out of the mouth, the aerosol. The e-liquid enters the body, not just into the lung, but the mouth, the throat, the esophagus, and the lungs itself. And that's important because when we get to side effects and various toxicity, people oftentimes have health-related problems in the mouth, in the throat, not just the lung itself. We go back to the history of vaping. Early designs go back almost 80 years. This idea that people have known for a long time about the dangers of smoking cigarettes. And for a long time, engineers said, if we could create a mechanical cigarette that does not involve fire, wouldn't that be a lot healthier for people and a lot safer? But I look at it, the very first generation reached the market in 2003, and that closely resembled a cigarette, and it was a throwaway disposable. And in 12 years, first generation, second generation, third generation, and I would argue now in 2021, we're in the fourth generation of vaping electronic nicotine delivery devices. I think about my iPad. I got my very first iPad in, I think, 2009. Now we're on the 11th generation. So the technology is incredibly rapidly evolving and changing. So just important things to remember. But what can actually be vape? What substances are traditionally vape? Of course, we think the vast majority of vaping devices use nicotine. But remember, other substances can be vape. Liquid cannabis, liquid THC, liquid CBD, cannabidiol. Flower itself, the actual flower product, can be vaped through a variety of different vaping devices. Spice or synthetic cannabis also can be vaped. And a variety of hallucinogens. So these are some of the newer drugs that we see out there, including things like LSD and even PCP, bath salts. These can all be vaped, other versions of hallucinogenic effects. What can't be vaped just yet are including things like caffeine. And you don't traditionally hear about things like cocaine or amphetamines being vaped, in part because chemically they're a little bit, they break down much quicker and you need much higher temperature for cocaine and amphetamines to be consumed. But technology, I think, is just around the corner, and I certainly would imagine that we'll see those substances also being vaped in the next 10 or 15 years. But what's usually in that e-liquid? If you actually look at those cartridges, most of the time, again, here's an example of the cartridge with the e-liquid inside it. About 4% potency of nicotine inside that. They have a lot of chemical flavorings and just a smattering, including mint, menthol, cotton candy, gelato, and usually a product called a humectant. A humectant are a substance that retains and draws moistures in. Essentially, it's what's inside like Jergens and various moisturizers. And it turns out that's the thing that actually causes a lot of the lung injuries with folks who are using vaping from cannabis. So it's a very interesting chemical term. It's a term that sometimes shows up on standardized tests, as a vocabulary word, a humectant. So it's something that retains and draws moisture in. The opposite of a humectant, of course, is a desiccant, which draws moisture out and keeps things from smelling. All right, so again, what's inside this vapor, the aerosol? So when you vape and you inhale it into your lung and you exhale it, and you see people on the street do that all the time, you have a big cloud of smoke, or seemingly smoke, a big cloud of a white area. In fact, if you look at the poster for our tonight's event, the vape culture, you'll see the aerosolized cloud. Well, inside that cloud, it turns out it's not just air, water, and carbon dioxide. It also includes any of the chemicals that were packaged in the e-liquid. That can include heavy metals. That can include the nicotine. That can include the various other carcinogens that are packed inside the e-liquid. So it's not completely benign. And here's a cartoon highlighting that aerosol is not harmless, that it has all these things in there, cancer-causing chemicals, heavy metals, flavorings that Mother Nature never intended for us to ingest, volatile organic compounds. So it's not just a simple matter that it's just water or just carbon dioxide, much more complicated than that. So let's get right down to the facts versus the fiction. You think about where in society should we think about vaping? One of the things I love about what the One community is doing is that we're practical. We're about common sense. We're about facing the facts and developing policies that just make sense based on science, intuition, and pragmatics. Right now, I'm not against vaping. I don't think we can prohibit it. The technology is clearly there. But could there actually be some benefits of the technology? The idea was that when the vaping devices first came to market, it said, hey, it's not smoking. It's not using fire. Maybe, therefore, we can decrease the risk of cancer. Maybe we can make the nicotine consumption experience less harmful. Maybe we can make nicotine use more social, more recreational, more like caffeine, in the sense that we don't see the cancer and the lung disease and things like that. Remember, 500,000 Americans die every year from tobacco-related illnesses. The vast majority of those are pulmonary and cardiac conditions. Or maybe these vaping devices could be a useful way of getting people to stop smoking cigarettes. Again, theoretical benefits. But even more so, vaping devices and the delivery systems might be able to get other medications into our bodies more efficiently. Think like asthma medicines, or cholesterol medicines, or even insulin, antibiotics, medications to fight infections. So the technology itself is really fascinating about getting substances into the body. But clearly, we know there's a downside. And here's where the facts are clear. And these are indisputable. Number one, addiction to nicotine from the vaping devices is real, and it's significant. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. We also know that young people, and we're talking about young people under the age of 25, who use e-cigarettes or any electronic nicotine device are at increased risk later on in life for smoking traditional combustible cigarettes. So in other words, if they don't start smoking or using vaping in the beginning, they probably wouldn't be smoking cigarettes down the road. We also know that e-cigarettes and devices mimic combustible cigarette use and help re-normalize smoking behaviors. So imagine what we've done over the last 30 years where we've gotten rid of public smoking. We've made smoking nearly a taboo behavior. When I grew up as a kid, you could smoke on planes and airports and restaurants and bars, and all of that's been changed by public health efforts. All that has completely reversed itself by normalizing smoking and behaviors in public. We know that e-cigarettes have been marketed as a way to quit smoking tobacco, but there's no scientific data to prove that this works. It is not an FDA-approved medication or an FDA-approved way to get off cigarettes. So people will say, yeah, I'm vaping because it's making me smoke less. I'm vaping to get off tobacco products, smoking cigarettes. It's completely false. No data to support that. We wouldn't like that. We would say, would that be amazing if that were true? But it's not as of March 2021. And in fact, many studies have found that smokers are less likely to quit if they are also using e-cigarettes. So clearly recognize harm that we know it's there. What are some of the trends in vaping that are important for us to know? These are slides taken from our National Institute on Drug Abuse, that is our nation's leading research center housed in NIH to look at trends in substance use and substance use disorder. And with nicotine vaping, it is astonishing. And you look at some of these numbers. Just measured, this is pre-pandemic, so this is our most recent data. We now, though, in the last 30 days, 1 out of 4 high school seniors reported vaping. 1 out of 4. 1 out of 5 sophomores. 1 out of 10 middle schoolers in 8th grade report in the last 30 days of their life that they actually have vaped. Even more astonishing, daily nicotine vapes. Nearly 12%, or 12 out of 100 high school seniors, are daily using vaping devices. Now, I went to high school in the 80s, and there was a whole segment in the high school I went to across the streets, and they would smoke before school, they would smoke in lunchtime, and they would smoke after school. And we always knew about them. And it always seemed like a rather forbidden group that was out there. And it always troubled me where the principal never went across the street to tell them to stop, but it was clear they didn't because they weren't on school grounds. So we've known about this pattern of adolescent use for forever. But when you look at these astonishing numbers, teen smoking uses go down, but teen vaping goes through the roof. This is 2019. When you look at teen vaping related to THC or cannabis, the numbers are also increasing at a shocking rate. Again, 14%, nearly 14 out of 100 high school students report vaping cannabis products in the last 30 days. And again, every year we start to see this go just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Why? Better technology, cheaper, affordable technology, rapid distribution of cannabis, acceptance of cannabis throughout the United States, celebration of cannabis in many ways through billboards and pop culture. And you just see it happening more and more and more. Talk about that more. And you think about the teens, well, why do they vape? Why do they pick up in the first place? And the number one is to see what it's like. That's what teenagers do. Adolescents, curious, interested. Number two, because it tastes good when you have the flavoring. And number three, to have a good time with my friends. Number four, to relax or relieve tension. Now we're starting to get into the self-medication area, and you see a wide variety. And you can put all of these teen report reasons for any substance, whether it be alcohol or cannabis, gambling, anything like that. But I think it's important we recognize that, again, teenagers and young people are going to continue to do what they do. They're teenagers. They have to experiment and try different things, but they have to be better educated at what these things are and what they aren't. Where can you buy them? Well, I bought this yesterday. I went into a gas station, and I said, and I kind of looking around, make sure no one's looking. I kind of felt like I was stealing something. I said, I'd like to buy a Juul, please, and a Juul device. And next thing I know, I spent $60. And I don't know if one's going to recover my receipt for that, but it was $60. And that's where people buy them: convenience stores, drugs, gas stations, 7-Elevens, AM/PMs, smoke shops. You'll see number two, online channels, buying it on the internet and having it delivered. We'll talk about that in a sec. And again, vape shops or smoke shops. In preparation for this, I also went into a smoke shop and I looked around, and just the sheer volume of products were on the shelf was staggering. I said to him, "How's business?" And he said to me, "Never been better." I said, "Why not?" I said, "How come? You got the pandemic, everyone's worried about COVID." He's like, "Because everyone loves to vape." And I thought that was such a powerful message from him, from the store owner. And that's an important area we look at. But why are the young people, again, using so much? It's the flavor. It's the flavor. Among high school current users, this is again a couple years back, more use flavored e-cigarettes than not. About 68% reporting the flavor. Again, when you have flavoring in them, cotton candy, sugary, spice, gelato, flavors that kids are already associated with, and with the nicotine, that makes for a very powerful reinforcement act. Juul has since removed their flavoring and only have menthol and Virginia tobacco, and we'll talk about that. So many other companies have maintained their flavorings. And again, here's another slide highlighting increased e-cigarettes leads to more straight up tobacco use. A few things about vaping among teenagers, again, between the ages of 12 to 25, let's say. Number one, absolutely, these are the facts that we should be walking away tonight. It's the most commonly used form of nicotine above cigarettes, above smokeless tobacco. Now, many adults assume that the pods themselves only have flavoring and do not have nicotine in them. And in fact, I saw a news piece last week talking about companies making their business to have vaping pods with no nicotine in them. So a market share with no nicotine. Again, normalizing that consumption behavior. Number three, availability of targeted ads create the mythology that this is safe, that this is acceptable. And when parents say that's fine, or when parents say I'm okay with my son or daughter vaping, they're now approving and allowing an addictive behavior to happen. So we see this too often. Everyone assumes that it's legal, it's regulated, it's safe, it's better than smoking. It doesn't smell like cigarettes. Therefore, it's okay for my son or daughter to use. And I think that's something we really want to challenge parents to think about. And that's absolutely an area where parents have to step up and say with a firm rule, this is what our house rules are. No smell of tobacco. It means it's hidden. We'll take a look at the most popular vaping device out there. And of course, that's the Juul. And their mission statement on their website is to improve the lives of the world's 1 billion adult smokers by eliminating cigarettes. Not by smoking, by getting rid of cigarettes. So they took the stance that cigarettes equal bad for the environment, bad for the body. Vaping device, modern, innovative, safe. And this is exactly the kind of marketing they would do before they voluntarily stopped marketing aggressively on the internet. Young, hip, skinny, seductive, glamorous, cool. And it's no surprise that this model looks like, some of the very popular celebrities and social media influencers there. But why is it so popular? It's essentially 75% of the electronic nicotine market share. It's more than Coca-Cola or Pepsi in the sodium share. And why is that? Again, look at the device. Easy to use. It's affordable. It used to come in a lot of different flavors. It's very slick, like the Tesla of vaping devices everywhere. And in many circles, it was kind of, quote, the thing to have. Easy to hide. If my son had this and I didn't know, I'd say that's his homework. I would not know. That's in partly why it's so popular. But even more so, it works. Now, here's an interesting thing. Up to now, you can buy directly off the website of Juul and get it shipped to your house, just like a subscription, like People Magazine. This actually is going to end in about a month or so through a law that was passed in December about shutting down shipments of tobacco and nicotine-related products. But I don't think that's going to stop the online market and the sales market. That's still going to continue very much. So that's the world we live in with the vaping. We know that there's significant impact. We know it's very popular. But what can we say definitively? What does it do to the body, the brain, and the mind? The main message to take home today is really two. Ideally, non-tobacco users should never vape. So again, in my mind, this is a product that has no known positive health benefits as of just yet. This isn't like alcohol, where alcohol has been shown potentially to lower blood pressure and lower heart attack risk. There's been no long-term studies showing that using a vape device would actually improve your overall health. So ideally, if we don't want people to start. And number two, if you are currently vaping, it does have health risks today, and the long-term damage and the harm still aren't known. We're talking about a product that's still only been out in the market for about 10, 15 years. So we don't know what's going to happen in another 15 years. So if you are vaping for 30 years consecutively, that may be when we start to see the cancer rates rise up or decrease life expectancy. We just don't know. So when we talk to young people or teachers or any of our clients that might be struggling with vaping, I think we have to come with a very firm statement of what we know the harms are. We know that, again, it normalizes smoking behavior. It'll then lead people more likely to transition to full-on cigarettes, full-on tobacco products where you light up. We know it's not going to help you reduce your cigarette use. We know that you will develop this disorder of addiction, of tobacco use disorder, and it will hurt your lungs and it will hurt your mental health. More specifically, though, some other things we may not think about is that just exposing the body, again, ingestion. Imagine the e-liquids getting in your mouth, in your throat, swallowing it, in your stomach. That in itself is toxic to the body and can cause problems like ulcer diseases, infections in the mouth, just damage in the mouth. There have been case reports of explosions by these vaping devices where unfortunately people have lost their lives or started house fires because of devices that have literally blown up. And we also know that if you're standing next to someone else who's vaping, that the secondhand aerosol exposure is also associated with lung problems and consumption and breathing in nicotine and various other chemicals, just like secondhand smoke. There have also been some more reports of seizures, people who use the vaping devices and then they actually have seizures because of what they're vaping. So again, just like any other substances, we're starting to see other health impacts that you may not think about, but have shown up and either in emergency rooms or in some cases out there as well. Again, what does it do to long-term impacts? Today's youth that start vaping now at age 15, 16, 17, 18, in 30 years, if they continue to do 30 years of vaping, what will that do to their blood pressure, to their blood vessels, and of course to their heart as they get older? All right, so even more so, again, for the adolescent, why we're so concerned about it, that because the adolescent brain is still growing, because it's still maturing, that it's prohibitively much more sensitive to nicotine and to vaping. So when vaping gets into the body, we're talking rapid absorption within milliseconds into the brain, getting into the brain and binding right to the parts that express dopamine and adrenaline and that people get when they ingest nicotines. But what does it really do over time is that, of course, it develops an addiction. And I like to think about this is that each nicotine pod in a joule is about equivalent to 1 pack of cigarettes. So we know that if you do about 5 milligrams a day of nicotine, or roughly 1/4 of an e-cigarette pod or a quarter pack of cigarettes, about 5, 6 cigarettes a day, that's enough to develop the state of addiction. And again, of course, the state of addiction, as we call it, tobacco use disorder, is very difficult. And then these are the criteria that look exactly like the criteria for alcohol or cocaine or cannabis. And you just go through that menu. Would anyone in this virtual webinar want any of these symptoms? Of course not. Where you're spending a lot of time obtaining the product, where you try to cut down and you can't, where you have withdrawal when you stop, when you're drinking or when you're driving and using hazardous situation, where you have health-related problems and you still vape anyway. These are the signs of addiction. These are the things that we talk about, and once it happens, these are serious issues. But even more so, think about this slide. If I remove the top header of tobacco withdrawal, I say, hey, here's a client, or here's your son or daughter, and over the last 2-3 weeks, they're just showing these signs. I'd say, that's my son every Monday morning. That's what the teenager is, right? But it turns out that that's what they're going through is signs of nicotine withdrawal. And they may, in fact, be using more and more, and suddenly they just stop and they develop these symptoms. It may actually not be depression. It may not be other drugs. It may be actually withdrawal. So tobacco withdrawal, vaping withdrawal from the product can look like a mixed variety of mental health issues. All right. So what do we know about vaping and its impact on mental health? Well, we know that if you already have mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, PTSD, stress, that you're then more likely to take up e-cigarettes. And vice versa, anyone with using e-cigarettes are more likely to have undiagnosed or unrecognized mental health problems. So they go hand in hand. And I think it's so critical for us not to judge and blame young people for vaping. Because when they say this is something that allowed me to think more clearly, or allowed me to calm down, or allowed me to focus in school, we have to listen and say, well, you shouldn't be vaping then. We have to be listening, well, what is it about that vaping that allowed you to function normally? That's the most critical message I want people to come back with. Here's some recent data about vaping associated with breathing concerns. And this was very essentially showing that for young people who are vaping on a consistent basis, that invariably they will develop these breathing concerns, chest tightness, not sleeping well because of wheezing, not being able to talk because of wheezing, limited ability to exercise without getting so tired, coughing at night. None of these are things that people would want to sign up for. None of these things are things that people would want. And yet people experience them, they go through them, but they don't make that link that it's from the vaping. Because again, they think that the vaping is safe. Again, they think about the marketing. Oh, well, no one else has problems. So, well, why am I coughing now? Again, make that link for people who are vaping. I want to highlight a couple of things that I think is of interest. This is something that we saw right before the pandemic started. And a year ago, we were talking about that. We were starting to see more cases in the hospitals throughout America about young people who were coming into the hospital with really awful lung disease. And it turns out that what it was a chemical inside predominantly cartridges that were containing THC that young people who had no prior lung problems were using. And for whatever reason, when they vaped that product, that chemical got into their lungs and damaged their lungs really to the point where they developed severe pulmonary disease, and some in fact died. In fact, 2019, there were almost 60 deaths throughout America from these lung-associated damage from vaping. The pandemic hit, the work kind of stopped, and of course, but it still continues. Anecdotally, we've had a number of patients who developed these lung problems, get hospitalized, get released from the hospital, and what happens? They go back to vaping. So when the addiction doesn't get treated, of course they're going to go back. And so that's a huge concern that we see. So what do we do with men and women who are, in fact, addicted to vaping or addicted to nicotine or addicted to cigarettes? And I think it starts with this screening question. For the clinicians in the room and as well as for the parents in the room, we can't ask the classic question, do you smoke cigarettes? Because people don't consider vaping smoking. Well, I don't smoke, I vape. So for the clinicians, we're encouraging clinicians to ask, in the last year, have you ever used a tobacco product? And if so, like cigarettes or a vaping device or cigars? We have to be more specific, because we just ask again, do you smoke? No. And then you go on to the next question. If you don't ask, you're going to miss that question about vaping. This is taken from the California Department of Public Health and their vaping quit line. We're going to talk a little bit better about the treatment options that you can do. So the first, though, again, I really want to highlight this. Vaping as of March 2021 cannot help a person quit smoking. There's no scientific evidence. It's theory only. It's been tried out in a couple of clinical trials and it did not work. And we should know that we, in fact, have many, many different products already on the market that will help people quit tobacco, whether it's smoking cigarettes, whether it's smokeless tobacco, or whether it's any electronic nicotine delivery. So these are the medications that we have out there. Some of these are not FDA approved for people under the age of 18, but some of them are, like nicotine replacement and various things like that. That's a whole nother talk for another time, but suffice it to say that when people get on proper medications for nicotine addiction, they can stop quitting. They can stop using tobacco. They can stop their vaping. They can stop all those products. These are the scientifically proven things that work. And in combination with psychotherapy and counseling and support, that number can be as high as almost 40, 50% of people a year later can completely be nicotine free, which is absolutely, I think, a really positive number. So, but for resources that everyone in this room should know about that are available at no cost, we start with, of course, California. California has a smokers helpline. That's 1-800-NO-BUTTS. That's for tobacco. They have a separate helpline for vaping, 1-844-8-NO-VAPE, 1-844-8-NO-VAPE. And they also have a quit. If you just text vaping to 66819, then you'll get hooked up with a vaping counselor. And what do you get from that? You get no-cost services for teens and adults. You get telephone coaching. You get referral sources. Sometimes they will send out nicotine replacement patches to people who can't afford it. But you get support. And it costs nothing. No cost, no waiting 24 hours a day. And I think that's very, very critical, because you think about how shameful it can be for a lot of people to go through quitting from vaping. It's important that they do it together. I want to end with something that we have to highlight, the impact of COVID on vaping about a year now. And here's what we know. So this is a recent study, and studies say one story. What we see in the front lines of clinical care is another, and what we see inside people's home is another. And what I want to highlight just one example of that. So this is where researchers looked at e-cigarette use before and during COVID. And they found that, in fact, in this survey of young people, that they actually saw that people were using less e-cigarettes. Part of it was because they were afraid that if they got COVID, that they would develop severe illness. Part of it is that they were concerned that parents were going to find out. And part of it is that they didn't have the ability to go purchase e-cigarettes. So the investigators said they were unsure whether this would be sustained once the pandemic is over. Now, that sounds nice, but let's also dive into that a little bit more. So the investigators called for the FDA, again, to use their authority to prevent online sales of e-cigarettes, to prevent youth from getting these products via the internet so that they get shipped to their house in brown paper bags. And that started to happen. But this is a research study. It's not always what you see in real life. In fact, what I see in real life is actually more young people vaping more. And again, particularly in California, where as we start to open up more, all the stores are open. The vape shops, the head shops, the smoke shops, they never closed. They were deemed essential. The cannabis dispensaries, essential. 7-Eleven, the AM/PMs, the gas stations, the various places you can buy, still open. So in fact, clinically, what I've seen is more young people continuing to vape and more young people continuing to vape surreptitiously without their parents' awareness. So what can we do? What should we do? And what will we do? Those are our three areas. I'm going to highlight about a year and a half ago, their federal laws were put into place to raise the minimum age of sale of tobacco products to age 18 to 21. How much do our retailers enforce it? Again, you think about during a pandemic where everyone's struggling to make sales. I think this is one of the areas where I think a lot of retail sales people may have forgotten that they have to enforce this because again, $60 is what I spent on those dual devices in the gas station. That's quite a bit of money. This is new information as of January 1st, 2021. Just a few months ago, our Governor Newsom signed into law banning the retail sale of flavored tobacco products, including menthol, fruit. Amazing, right? The measure, though, exempted hookah, cigar, pipe tobacco. Didn't get a lot of press, right? We didn't hear about a lot of this. And in fact, what happened, though, was a classic story. He puts this out there. He wants every single flavored tobacco product gone from the market. The industry pushes back, says that's unconstitutional, that's a government overreach. And classic California, what do? They take it to the courts. They get 1 million signatures, and they're going to put it on the ballot as a proposition. So look for that proposition to come out, I think, in 2022 about whether or not we as a state want to have tobacco flavored products on the market. But until that time, industry can continue to sell to flavored tobacco products unabated. So that's something we can think about. What can we do about that? Because if we feel strongly about tobacco and flavoring, we need to get involved. We need to advocate. We need to write letters. We need to talk about it in the media. We need to think about what is our position as parents, as educators, as clinicians. The FDA says very clearly what we ought to do is prevent youth from getting access to these products. Again, how difficult is that when you can walk into any of these stores and buy them within 2 or 3 minutes, or you can buy them online? The FDA says we have to curb marketing of these products. That means print, that means social media, that means Twitter, all those things. We can then continue to talk about educating teens about the danger of this at an early stage. For parents, I tell them very simply, number one, you got to learn about these products. Go into a smoke shop, go into a 7-Eleven, look at the various products, hold them in your hand, talk to the person behind the counter, get a sense of what they are, what they look like, what the labels are on. And if you're inside the home and you have a firm expectation you don't want tobacco-free in the home, that's your house. That's the house rules. Make it clear. But this third point, this thing is so clear, a consistent example. Many of the young people talk about, they learn the vaping and smoking from their family members, from their parents themselves. So if you yourself are a smoker and you say to your son or daughter, I don't want you vaping, that's not consistent, and that's not, I think, an effective use of prevention messaging. creating punitive consequences, not likely to stop vaping. You need to stop vaping or you're grounded. It doesn't work. They're just going to want to vape more, or they'll just hide it more. Instead, think about, talk with your son or daughter about, well, what's the reason you did vape? What's the reason you went ahead and did that, knowing full well all these negative side effects of it? We're fortunate to have a 15-year-old. He's a sophomore. I talk to him about drugs every day. And I talked to him about vaping just before this talk. I said to him, how come you never vape? He said, Dad, why would I? It's just not something that interests me. It's not something I want to do. I know about the harms. I hear you talking about it all the time. We're fortunate he doesn't have any mental health conditions, but he also heard us talking about vaping since he was like 5 years old. And lastly, the parents had to put on that various public pressure to the schools, to the community, to the parks, wherever they think vaping needs to be addressed. And for the young people who are listening here tonight, really encouraging, you had the slide exactly from last year. Think about, how do you take those healthy risks? The number one reason for vaping was because people were curious and wanted to try it out. But try out those other healthy risks, like joining one, like starting a club, like getting a job, like writing a book, like making TikTok videos, like learning how to cook. Those are the healthy risks. Learning how to manage, accept negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. That's the thing, what one I think is so incredible about connections, and realizing that we're not perfect, realizing that we all have anxieties and concerns, and we have to figure out how to handle them rather than run away from them. And that healthy self-care habits start really young. The exercise and nutrition, the not exposing yourself to toxic substances. And again, think about the environmental impact. The young people are so big on climate change. When I just hold this device up, think about the energy, think about the materials, think about the impact it takes to produce 1 joule device. Think about the plastic. Think about all the humans that went into making this device, and the gas to transport it, the airplanes to move it from place A to place B. This is a tremendous environmental impact. Think about the litter when these devices and these pods pop off and they get into the ocean. Those are the things I think for adolescents to realize that what you do does matter and does have an impact. All right, I have time for a few questions. And before I do that, this is my contact information. That is my email. You can email me with questions, ideas, comments, things you're noticing from the field. I have started to do a little bit more in the Twitter world at Fongster98. Want to go ahead and follow me. We're going to throw some things out there for that. I want to thank again Lynn for inviting me out here, and all the sponsors of One for doing this. This is really absolutely a amazing event you're doing virtually. But with that, let's take a couple Q&A, and then we'll go on to the panel. So I see a question here, and Don, I know you have a bunch of questions, but I am going to grab this one that I think is super cool. How do you feel about the nicotine patch to titrate off the vape? And is the patch better for you than vaping? So again, the nicotine patch is nicotine replacement. It's an FDA-approved medication to help people stop using tobacco products. Smoking cigarettes, vaping devices, smokeless tobacco. So absolutely, I feel very good about it. Now, the thing about the patch is it's called passive. You slap it on, you don't do anything, you don't think about it. But what people make the mistake of is that they can also still be taking nicotine gum while they have the patch on. So you can have passive plus active nicotine replacement for when you have urges and cravings related to tobacco. Is the patch better for you than vaping? I would say absolutely yes, because it's scientifically proven, it's scientifically FDA approved. It doesn't have any of those chemicals that get into your lungs. The patch is purely nicotine that gets absorbed into your bloodstream. All right, other great question.
Question is, how do you feel about, is it just as dangerous to smoke out of a vaping device that has no nicotine in it, like the cloudy device that has melatonin in it?
We're learning something every night. So you're hearing about vaping again. You're taking some sort of liquid that has lots of chemicals, has lots of stuff. You're firing it up to a very high temperature degree, and you're inhaling it into your lungs and you're absorbing it into your body. So we don't know what that's going to do over a long stretch of time. But Mother Nature really never intended our body to be exposed at such high temperatures. And I think that's the sort of technology we have to think about. Can there be safer vaping technology down the road when people can consume substances that can make their life better? Again, medications or other things. Maybe, but we're not there yet in March 2021. And until we have clear, definable scientific evidence that this is safe, I would have to say we don't have that. Take another example, Diet Coke. Diet Coke is a substance, right? That has tremendous amounts of chemicals and various things in that. And it's out there in the market. We know, we have lots of studies showing that it's not good for our health. It's not good for us long term. And yet it's never been more popular than ever. It's the same thing. Should we outlaw Diet Coke, or should we continue to figure out how to refine it to make that experience better? So again, I'm not against Juul. I'm not against what they're doing. I'm against the standards where people have accepted that this is safe. It's not. We need more work, and we need more people to be really emphasizing what the truth is rather than the fiction.
Here's a question. How do I know my kid is vaping?
Oh my goodness. Well, here's the thing. I'm not a fan of random drug testing your kid for like trying to catch them. I first look at, number one, if you ask the kid, are you vaping? And if they say, yes, I'm vaping, then they're admitting it. But of course, the classic line would be, look at all the other things what a kid should be doing. I've often said to my son, I want you to do random things. I want you to have some privacy. But here's the fact. Your grades have to be good. You have to play a sport. You have to have play a musical instrument. You have to do your household chores. And you have to treat your brother and your mother and me with respect. If you do all those things, I really don't know what you're doing behind closed doors. I know when a kid stops doing those things, it may be vaping, it may be other drugs, but it's something. So again, it can't just be simply a smell, because if you're using a flavored vaping device, it may smell fruity. It may smell very like lavender almost. But again, you can do a weird urine drug test and all that stuff, but that's not useful. Again, as parents, I think instead of saying, how should I know if my kid's doing these things? Instead, come out with a firm statement. I do not want you doing these things. I do not want these things inside our home. Should I discover these products in the home, there's going to be some very serious consequences that we're going to follow through. Should you get suspended from school now that we're going back, you're going to end up on a one on campus. You're going to end up in Lynn Peterson's 8-session shop, which is great, which looks good on your college resume. But again, it's a much more complicated question. The question isn't, how do I know when my kid's vaping? It's, what do I do when my kid looks like he or she is suffering? That's the key. You got to then say, regardless of cause, get them into the hands of any of our amazing providers here tonight.